Your Excellency, Bishop Deepak Valerian Tauro, Auxiliary Bishop of Delhi, Father Roby, the Director of the Chavara Cultural Centre, my friend George Kallivailil, the wonderful audience here this evening. Friend, I hope that covers everyone. As we say in Kerala, Ellavarikkum ente vinithamaya namaskaram. I'm honoured beyond words to have been graciously invited by the Chavara Cultural Centre to deliver the St. Chavara Lecture, instituted to honour the life and legacy of the Centre's patron saint, Saint Kuriakose Elias Chavara. Before I begin, I think on behalf of all of us, a special word of appreciation and tribute to the marvellous singer, Dinny Matthew, for his wonderful invocation. Endoru swaramaairunnu. Wonderful, wonderful. As a proud son of Kerala, one who since 2009 has had the pleasure and privilege of serving and speaking for its capital city, Thiruvananthapuram, in Parliament, I deeply venerate Saint Chavara, who was in the vanguard of revolutionizing and reforming a Kerala starkly different from the modern state we know, driven by peace, pluralism, prosperity, and progress today that we take so much pride in and which we strive to propel to greater heights. I accepted the Centre's invitation to deliver this lecture instantly, for while Saint Chavara is enshrined in the hearts of us Malayalis, he is woefully little known outside Kerala. This is a travesty and must be remedied forthwith. After all, the luminous path he forged to social advancement in Kerala can and must serve as an example for the whole of India, inspiring legions of public-spirited citizens, civil society activists, social reformers, public servants, and politicians yet to come. Therefore, standing here at a lectern in the nation's capital, I fervently hope that meditating on the saint's unparalleled life will elicit greater interest, particularly amongst the non-Keralites who I understand are present here today, in the extraordinary contribution and the monumental legacy of the saint and its enduring relevance. More vital than ever today, when the humanist ideals that Saint Chavara embodied, such as reason and rationality, intercommunal harmony, religious eclecticism, the upliftment of the so-called lower castes and untouchables, and education as a tool for fighting bigotry, extremism, and the inequities of the caste system are under profound assault. It was Sir Isaac Newton who said that if I have seen farther, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. Not a soul here would disagree when I say that if Kerala today sees farther than most other Indian states and boasts social and economic parameters comparable only to highly developed and flourishing Western nations, it is because we truly stand upon the shoulders of such titans as Saint Kuriakose Elias Chavara, who steadfastly reckoned with some of the most pernicious and pervasive challenges facing not only Kerala, but India as a whole, and that too almost a century before India's arrival at independence. We recently celebrated the 75th anniversary of the adoption of our Constitution. Starting from 9 December 46, when they first convened in the Constituent Assembly of India and began to evolve a roadmap for surmounting the constant and countless obstacles to our growth as a secular egalitarian democracy committed to the rule of law, the architects of our independence outlined solutions that mirrored in many ways the innovative initiatives that Saint Chavara had undertaken nearly 100 years earlier, the 19th century. What really strikes me as extraordinary about the saint is that in the 1800s, he was anticipating and enacting solutions that modern India would employ from 1947 onwards. And after all, this is only one example of Saint Chavara's foresight. The provisions in the directive principles of state policy, which we have all been reminded of in the Constitution Day celebration, Part 4 of the Constitution of India, relating to the onus on the state to educate citizens, especially the weakest and most vulnerable, could virtually have been written by this crusader for social and educational reform, who breathed his last 80 years before the Constitution came forth. But before I dwell on the transformative trail that the saint blazed through mid-19th century Kerala, I should like to congratulate the Chavara Cultural Centre for all the wonderful work they've been doing in a glittering array of socially beneficial fields. Their reverence for Saint Chavara is surely the fountainhead of their vitality and vigour, spurring them on from strength to strength and enabling them to undertake some prodigious ventures, latterly under the leadership of Father Roby. Among them, and this list is far from exhaustive, is their quest for interreligious harmony, one of the saints' articles of faith, to foster which they instituted the Secretariat of World Fellowship of Interreligious Councils and conducted at least a dozen World Assembly of Religions, which by enunciating the commonalities amongst all of our world's major faiths and facilitating dialogue amongst them, have been welcomed and lauded the world over. And it's wonderful to see representatives of so many different faiths present here in our midst today. As men and women of God committing to building upon the legacy of Saint Chavara, whose sweeping educational reforms ushered modernity into Kerala, the Chavara Centre has been striving to turn their patron saint's dream of universally accessible education into reality. Firmly of the view that admission to educational institutions ought to be contingent on one's desire to learn, they have pioneered Chavara Institute of Management and Media Studies, which provides affordable and outstanding vocational training to young Indians, especially women, and especially those who hail from rural areas and marginalized sections of society, empowering them to shatter the numerous glass ceilings that have long stifled and smothered. Transcending the bounds of the social, cultural, and educational realms, the centre also espouses sustainable development, as we just heard, and champions environmental conservation, in line with the saint's conviction, drawn from the biblical emphasis on humanity and nature both being creations of God, that a civilization cannot succeed without eliminating all traces of exploitation. This includes the exploitation of nature for satiating human rapacity, a mainstay of the colonial enterprise whose rise Saint Chavara would have witnessed in India. Adapting their patron saint's 19th century ideals to 21st century technological advancements, the centre also encourages a wide range of environment-friendly activities in their areas of operation. These include innovative measures for managing waste and treating sewage, undertaking sustainable agriculture, rehauling residential areas to make them safer and greener, cultivating pesticide-free and organic vegetables through terrace and rooftop farming, and transitioning to such cleaner and renewable sources of energy as rainwater and solar harvesting. Earnestly following the example of the saint, the Chavara Cultural Centre has worked hard since its inception in 1971 in Cochin to translate their noble preceptor's liberating vision into reality. At this they have succeeded in great measure, but this has neither made them complacent nor vain. On the contrary, to sharpen their zeal for undertaking more philanthropic and socially beneficial projects. For God's work, which in their view means serving all causes of humanity, never ceases and demands a lifetime of sweat, toil. So though they set new records and scale greater heights day after day, and this lecture series is very much amongst those heights, they continue soldiering on in the service of women's empowerment, poverty eradication, and social and spiritual advancement, all while emphasizing that what unites us all as human beings, as Indians, is far more powerful and enduring than what divides us. Indeed, implicit in their credo of accepting, respecting, and celebrating diversity is, of course, a slogan that they have emblazoned in the centre's own letterheads and mastheads, is for them the fact that whichever road to the Lord Almighty one might take, if it is not paved with love and respect for one's fellow human beings and nature, one shall never come face to face with God. To be religious or spiritual, and I think this applies to all faith, is to love humankind as one. It is by being broad-minded and righteous to speak out against injustices and atrocities wherever and whenever they occur, not just when the victims share your faith. It is, in other words, to see the divine in all human beings, in all trees and plants. This is what Saint Chavara personified through his glorious life, and this is what the Chavara Cultural Centre seeks to instill in our hearts. Therefore, I commend them and all the wonderful work they've been doing through you, Father Roby. At the heart of all the trailblazing Reformation movements initiated by Saint Kuriakose Elias Chavara was his unwavering conviction that all humankind is one and evil. We are told in the book of Genesis 1:26-27, and I quote, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created." This the saint construed in humanist terms, taking it to mean that the Lord Almighty, having created all of us in his image, has endowed us all with an inviolable dignity. Regardless of whether we're man or woman, Hindu or Muslim or Christian, so-called high caste or so-called low caste, it simply doesn't matter. In front of God, we are all equal. Created, Saint Chavara realized, as we all have been by the divine and bear his likeness, all have an inherent dignity which makes us equals in a common cause under which we can never be denuded. In many ways, this was the basis of the transformative social and educational awakening that the saint triggered. As the scholar Dr. Joseph Chako Chennatasheri, a member of the Carmelites of Mary Immaculate, which the saint had established, writes, and I quote, "Saint Chavara was a Christian humanist who practices religion for the welfare of society. The humanism which was inherent in him made him come out of his solitude and isolated life inside the monastic walls and get immersed in the uplifting of the common people and the downtrodden. The Manamam Hill, where he lived in his monastery, was a comfortable zone for him as far as a solitary life was concerned. It would have definitely catered to his spiritual hunger. But his spirituality of humanism urged him to come down from the hill and to live amongst the daily struggles of the people. For him, his neighbors were God's children. His God compelled him to serve community, especially the poor, needy." Unquote. What a glorious evocation of the loving Father's life and legacy, perfectly outlining his credo of spiritual humanity and inclusivity. Though the saint was a priest and religious leader, he was also a teacher of theology, or as would have been more popularly known in Syriac and in Malayalam, Malpan, in the Syro-Malabar Church. He would, of course, eventually come to be hailed as a social reformer beyond compare. But before that, he was to evolve his faith-driven philosophy of social reform, which would govern the course of his life. After being ordained as a priest on 29 November 1829, young age of 24, he undertook pastoral ministry for a while, but soon returned to the seminary to teach, which is perhaps a confirmation of the fact that being a teacher and transforming his students' lives was his fiercest passion and gave him immeasurable joy. Scholars explain Saint Chavara's spiritual and philosophical trajectory by invoking the theory of evolution of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the French philosopher, Jesuit priest, and paleontologist. This I found especially fascinating and integral to our discussion this evening, because drawing on both science and spirituality, Teilhard de Chardin posited that evolution is not simply a biological or material process, but also a spiritual and mental one. For him, the evolution of humankind entails not only the physical development of our species, but also the growth of consciousness, society, and spirituality. Humans evolve, according to him, from purely material biological beings into social and spiritual beings. And as they evolve, the society they inhabit evolves as well. Driving this evolution is love, which for him was not just an emotional or interpersonal phenomenon, but in fact a cosmic energy, a universal force that propels humanity towards greater unity and understanding, and ultimately to God. So love both drives evolution and leads to what Teilhard de Chardin called the omega point, that terminus of existence where all creation converges into a unified divine whole. Much like, I'm tempted to point out, as a Hindu myself, how the individual Atman merges into the universal transcendent Brahman, according to the Hindu philosophical school of Advaita Vedanta. But coming back to the saint, Chandrasekhar argues that Saint Chavara was a pristine example of such love-driven evolution. In his words, the life and contributions of Saint Kuriakose Elias Chavara is the story of a journey to authentic social and spiritual being. I'm sure that Saint Chavara's own outlook on human and societal evolution and the love as essential as it happens to be elusive that drives it was crucial to his impact on Malayali society. A closer look at Saint Chavara's religious and reformative activities reveals that he looked upon God as both the origin and the ultimate goal of evolution. And in this colossal cosmic process, he regarded Christ to be the central figure. Indeed, he looked upon himself in his enduring humility as an instrument of Jesus, having been dispatched to earth to translate into reality the ideals Jesus strove for and sacrificed himself. The saint realized early on that this could only be done by serving the causes of humanity and delivering the downtrodden from the iniquities of poverty and the harrowing caste system plaguing Indian and, of course, Kerala society in the 19th century. So while he was deeply anchored in his faith, especially in the gospel, which collectively narrate the life and teachings of Jesus and refer to Jesus as Ende Nalla Appa, my beloved Father, he confined neither himself nor his faith to the four walls of the church. Saint Chavara realized that above all, Jesus embodied love and compassion, precisely the qualities he saw missing from the Kerala of his time. And without love, as we have seen, human beings and society cannot evolve. Much as a fragrance remains futile without the breeze to swirl it around and spread it, so too the love personified by Jesus Christ, which as the saint recognized is the very love that all religions preach, needed to be woven into the fabric of society, enabling it to love, enabling it to empathize. Now, this scholar holds that the countless fruits of Saint Chavara's life and legacy are all the products of his ardent love for God founded in his ascetic life. His asceticism did not limit him to remain only with prayer inside the church or his room. Instead, it gave him more and more strength to reach to his fellow human beings by extending charity and, says the scholar, by working at the same time for his own salvation. Now, I disagree with Dr. Chandrasekhar's last comment because I believe the saint would have regarded the thought of working for his own salvation as selfish. Rather, he selflessly committed himself to ensuring the betterment of his fellow human beings, whom he saw entrenched in horrific impoverishment and inequality, and he wanted to empower them such that they could liberate themselves. In other words, he undertook his social and educational reforms not because he sought salvation for himself, but because he sought to salvage society and imbue it with love and compassion and pave the way for evolution. Not salvation, but salvage. And this, by the way, to him was synonymous with the liberation of the oppressed, especially through education. Now, it would be simplistic, however, to look merely upon the saint as a spiritually motivated social reformer. Let us not forget that he was also an astute administrator, not least of the church, which he safeguarded from a split. I think all of you know that story, belonged to the church, but in 1861, when Thomas Rokos arrived in Kerala without proper credentials from the Pope, the Archbishop of Virapoli anointed Saint Chavara as the Vicar General of the Syro-Malabar Church. Even today, multiple generations later, leaders of the church and members of Kerala's Catholic community gratefully remember the saint's contribution, hailing him at times as the father of the Syro-Malabar Church, for deftly and resiliently steering the church through that tumultuous era, preventing it from splitting. This is to say, there was also to Saint Chavara a practical and pragmatic side, which became all the more pronounced when he journeyed into society's heart of darkness, seeking to replace that darkness with a light of love and compassion. Bishop Joseph Kalarangat of the Diocese of Pala has written that the saint, a genius of the Syrian Christian tradition of India, developed a mosaic of theological and spiritual ideas. He was at once a Malpan and a secular intellectual. As an able administrator and a spiritual leader, he got ample chances to disseminate his inspiring thoughts. This is a critically important point, but it proves beyond his inner lining of mysticism and spirituality, which was doubtless the essence of his being, the saint donned in the face of societal aggressiveness and narrow-mindedness a cloak of secular pragmatism. This enabled him to adapt his lofty theological principles to the wretched realities of society's weakest members, making them benefit in the here and now. In my view, nowhere was he more pragmatic than in his emphasis on education. You see, in St. Chavara's view, literacy was not merely a virtue to be desired for its own sake. Instead, he believed that literacy, or being educated, was really the only lifeline that the suppressed have. It was the only knotted rope they could latch onto and use to clamber out of the morass of poverty and prejudice that an imperious and indifferent society had cast them into. Education, in other words, was a catalyst for social transformation. And together with gainful employment, the saint believed it to be the only means of emancipation. In due course, the astute administrator in St. Chavara would manifest itself again when he dedicated himself lock, stock, and barrel to building up educational institutions, even in the face of vitriolic resistance. What is indisputable, however, is that through service to others, he communed with God. And by serving society's weakest and most vulnerable souls, he worshipped the Lord Almighty, imploring the divine to endow him with the strength to carry on his task to fruition. And never did St. Chavara draw a distinction between the material world and the spiritual world, rejecting the former as crude and crass and questing after the other as ultimate goal. No. Instead, he summoned from his spirituality the strength to improve the shambolic material condition of his fellow Malayalam. All of this led my friend Paul Zachariah, the venerable and mightily prolific Malayalam writer, to say of the saint, and I quote, "He belonged to that category of saints who are, so to say, restlessly involved with people and causes, that improving the lot of the deprived and making bold moves in their own way to create the kingdom of God in the immediate world around him." Unquote. To put it simply, much as Mahatma Gandhi in the 20th century referred to his conception of a perfect society as Ram Rajya, a democratic land with the sovereignty of the people based on pure moral authority and where prince and pauper both enjoy equal rights, so too Saint Chavara 100 years earlier questioned for a kingdom of God in the here and now, where love and compassion abound, enabling human beings and society's evolution, and fraternity, egalitarianism, and righteousness flourish. To herald the dawn of this kingdom of God in a terribly discriminatory, stratified, and hierarchical Kerala, the saint turned to that most indispensable power of education, which for ages had been denied to vast swathes of society on the deplorable ground of caste and untouchability. Long before such towering crusaders for social justice as Sri Narayana Guru, Chattambi Swamigal, and Vakam Abdul Qadir Maulvi embarked on their reformatory journeys, Saint Chavara had already initiated a wide array of revolutionary reforms in Malayali society. Hailed though he did from a Syriac Christian family that enjoyed privileged social status, he devoted himself to educating and uplifting those relegated to the lowest rungs of Kerala's deeply stratified and hierarchical society. A society so unequal and exclusionary that even wells and roads were out of bounds for those belonging to the lower castes. Attending schools and gaining an education was simply inconceivable to all Avarnas, generations upon generations of whom were thus condemned to being unlettered, uninformed, and therefore unquestioning. Rejecting this status quo as violative of the inherent dignity of each man and woman, for not only are we equal as children of God, we have also been cast in his image, as the saint believed, the saint launched his redoubtable Pallikudam movement. In fact, there is a saying, it's not just the Palli that matters, the church, it is the Pallikudam, the school attached to the church. And he launched it by setting up schools in church premises where he believed that everyone was equal and education was everyone's birthright. And thus he flagged off India's quest for universally accessible education. More than a century later, St. Chavara's 19th century pursuit of education for all regardless of differences of faith, caste, creed, and native tongue, found a legal sheath with Article 45 of the Constitution of India under the directive principles of state policy, making it incumbent upon the state to provide for free and compulsory education for all children until they complete the age of 14 years. In 2002, as you all know, our Parliament translated this directive principle into reality by upgrading it to a fundamental right, which in turn was bolstered by the Right to Education Act of 2009. Far removed in time though we may be from him, modern Indians, it seems, remain committed to the saint's indelible legacy. At the same time, we've also repeatedly dishonored his vision of an egalitarian and all-embracing society, which we are sadly not yet. I spoke earlier of the secular pragmatist. Though Saint Chavara was a deeply devout man of faith, a true servant to the Lord Almighty, he knew that education, insofar as defying suffocating social norms of gender and caste discrimination was concerned, was tremendously important. Its function was not religious, but social, political, and reformative. While religion could facilitate education, as the saint ensured it did in the Pallikurams, it could never be allowed to become an impediment to literacy. His efforts gained momentum when he successfully persuaded Bishop Bernardine Bacinelli to issue a circular in 1856, which would become a watershed moment in Kerala's journey towards universal literacy. The circular, delivered as an order, warned that parishes failing to establish Pallikurams, educational institutions, would face excommunication. It was this bold directive that spurred the establishment of schools in every parish. And that's how the name Pallikuram came about, schools attached to church. Saint Chavara, with characteristic foresight, took a personal interest in ensuring the circular's implementation. He entrusted members of his congregation with the task of overseeing the creation and management of these schools, making education a cornerstone of parish and monastic life. And what we don't realize is that it was Saint Chavara who initiated in India the very concept of the paid professional teacher. There was no such thing. We had the Gurukul. You went and lived with your guru and you learned and gave whatever dakshina you could, and that was that. But Saint Chavara collected money from his parishioners and paid a salary to the teachers, very modest salary, but so that they could afford to devote themselves to the children without worrying about how they would support them. A great idea which we now take for granted. But can you imagine, before Saint Chavara, there was no such thing as a paid teacher? In other words, as the Vicar General of the Syro-Malabar Christians, he had threatened to shut down churches that failed to comply with setting up schools in their precincts, and he never allowed anyone, not even his own faith sometimes, to stand in the way of his desire to heave his fellow human beings out of the squalor and stratification in which they had long been languishing. And were I to ask you, who introduced the midday meal scheme for school children in India, most of you may well say it was K. Kamaraj, the estimable freedom fighter and congressman who came up with the idea as chief minister of the state of Madras, though some credit MGR as well. Only you would have the wrong South Indians in mind. For in actuality it was Saint Chavara who, as early as the 1850s, began in the schools free midday meal and even provided clothes and books to reduce dropouts amongst the poor Avarna students. Education, therefore, was not a formality for him. It could not merely be foisted upon a student. Instead, a conducive atmosphere had to be created for it. So once again, this fearless saint beat modern India to the crunch. While the Supreme Court in the early 2000s had to order the government of India to provide nutritious midday meals to all children in government and government-assisted schools, Saint Chavara had embarked on this initiative a century and a half earlier, by doing which he also anticipated Article 46 of the Constitution, which urges the state to promote and safeguard the educational and economic interests of the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other weaker sections. The saint raised funds for these altruistic measures by collecting pidiyari, a fistful of rice, which encouraged the well-off to donate a small portion of rice every day to feed the needy, and tithes from affluent families, as I said, to pay the teachers. The pidiyari initiative was so impactful that it became the foundation of Inimishivade Dharma Sabha, a pious organization founded by Saint Chavara, to manage and expand this charitable effort. Sir C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, thank you so much, Dewan of Travancore, who modernized the princely state and was a fierce champion of social and educational reform, was so impressed with Saint Chavara's ingenious initiative that in 1936 he too introduced midday meals in government schools in Travancore. Now, far from contenting himself with merely establishing educational institutions, the saint was an institution builder and astute administrator who agonized over the future of his school. How will they be run without his being there to manage the show? That's why he set up the Carmelites of Mary Immaculate, CMI, the first indigenous Catholic religious organization for men, which became over the years a wellspring of highly dedicated and skilled personnel for managing St. Chavara schools and other charitable institutions. Education could never be universally accessible unless women, too, could avail themselves of it. And so it was that the Congregation of the Mother of Carmel, the first religious congregation for women that the saint founded in 1866, set up schools for women with boarding facilities to boot, making the first few strides towards true blue women empowerment in Kerala. You cannot even imagine how groundbreaking a milestone this was for the late 19th century. In 1869, Saint Chavara founded a stellar philanthropic institution in his native village. This house of charity was a refuge for the abandoned, the aged, the ailing, testifying to the fact that the saint's emphasis was not only on uplifting the downtrodden to education, but also in ministering to those who were so callously tossed aside to the margins of our society's conscience. His was all in all a healing touch. His conception of social justice and equality, firmly wedded to the idea that progress, both individual and societal, can simply not be made by excluding or exploiting anybody. Let me also briefly dwell on Saint Chavara's heterodoxy, which, while it must have shocked his contemporaries as an aberration, for it was vastly ahead of his time, was really only a reflection of India's civilizationally capacious and all-embracing character. A true man of faith, he held in his body not a single fanatical bone, and must surely have believed that regardless of how you conceive of the Lord Almighty, there is but one God we all worship. And the saint would have added, if we are to serve that God, we can do no better than serving our fellow human beings. His conviction that all faiths contain profound and universal truths is manifest in his establishing in 1846 a Sanskrit school in Mandanan, where ordinary men and women of all castes and creed studied Hindu scriptures in Sanskrit. This was a delicious act of subversion, for in one fell swoop, Saint Chavara threw open the doors of Sanskrit, the language of the elite, which had so far been their exclusive preserve, to whoever aspired to master this tongue. Whether you're a Dalit or a Christian, you're welcome. Also in 1846, with the permission of Swati Tirunal, the Maharaja of Travancore, the saint established a printing press. This technology enabled widespread circulation of ideas, which the saint regarded as a prerequisite for fostering universal access to knowledge and thereby to learning. As Chenatasheri puts it, strenuous efforts were made by Chavara to establish a press in order to bring literacy and contribute to the development of the Malayalam language. Under the stewardship of the saint, the press published commendable educational material and works that promoted social harmony and served as secular literature, disabusing society several superstitions and regressive notions, caste and gender, and increasing the accessibility to education. It was, writes Chenatasheri, Saint Chavara's strong belief that the light of knowledge will illumine their people's hearts, and through self-confidence, they will reach greater levels of growth in personhood. Therefore, it can be said that in addition to his contributions to education and charity, Saint Chavara was a pioneer in Kerala's publishing history. In 1846, he established St. Joseph's Press, the third printing press in Kerala, and the first founded by a Malayali without foreign assistance. From this press emerged in 1887 Nasrani Deepika, the oldest Malayalam newspaper in circulation today, represented by my friend George Kallivailil, a tangible testament to his vision of spreading knowledge far and wide. But alongside mulling over some of Saint Chavara's revolutionary education reforms, let us also zoom out and examine what was happening in Kerala and India as a whole around this time, when the saint was beginning to come into his own and shape his monumental legacy. The 19th century was a period of nationwide social, political, cultural, and economic ferment, a churn so industriously and innovatively humanist that it spawned innumerable reform movements across India. While Christianity had been present in southern India since the days of St. Thomas the Apostle, who is believed to have landed on the Malabar coast in 52 AD, it truly became a dominant cultural and religious force across Western India then, and towards the end of the 15th century, the Portuguese arrived in Kerala. In the decades leading up to the 19th century, Christianity and India's older faiths, chief amongst them Hinduism and Islam, found themselves in dialogue with each other. At times benign, at times belligerent, these inter-religious conversations awakened Hindu society to glaring faults in their religious framework, especially as it manifested in day-to-day life in the abominable treatment of women and the horrors of the caste system. By the time the 19th century came around, the East India Company had cemented themselves as overlords of the subcontinent. Having diminished the Mughal Badshah in Delhi, they presided over India from Calcutta and were fast taking upon themselves, for reasons more political than reformatory, the onus to purge Hindu society of its ill. While this led to widespread consternation, it also prompted countless Hindus all across the country to introspect on critiques of their faith and come to the realization that there were indeed elements in it that had to be discarded in the interests of reason and rationality, as also the inherent dignity of each individual. We're all aware that they blazed across northern India a revolution in 1857, which nearly uprooted the company. Yet few remember that another revolution began the same year in the three presidencies of Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras, when the first modern universities were established, together with the widespread circulation of vernacular literature, which carried the time's raging debates about religion, social practice to every nook and cranny. These universities played a crucial role in the social and cultural reforms of the 19th century, sparking fresh thought and shaking people out of their traditional ruts. As the historian K.N. Panikkar notes, the beginning of modernity was heralded not by the arrival of the West in India, but by the onset of social and religious reforms, which is popularly called the Renaissance following the European experience. The genesis of the Indian Renaissance is hence traced to the portentous 19th century, to the singular efforts of Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar in Bengal to remedy the deplorable conditions in which women were compelled to live and to reform antediluvian religious practices, and then, of course, by Saint Kuriakose Elias Chavara in Kerala. This reforming imperative rapidly permeated northern India, where Dayanand Saraswati, the founder of the Arya Samaj, was amongst foremost embodiments. Other parts of India followed. In Maharashtra, M.G. Ranade founded the Prarthana Samaj, which sought to guide society towards a more egalitarian religious order, with people believing in and worshipping only one God. And Jyotirao Phule founded the Sathya Shodhak Samaj, which took on the deeply entrenched caste system, fighting against untouchability and promoting social equality by advocating for the education and empowerment of women and lower caste communities, while critiquing the religious and social hierarchies upheld by traditional Hindu practice. In Andhra Pradesh, Kandukuri Veerasalingam initiated a vibrant movement that championed the education of women and remarriage of widows and aimed to discard the dowry system and the custom of child marriage. But before all of them, Saint Kuriakose Elias Chavara undertook the first of these reformative enterprises in Kerala. It dismays me to note that such social reformers as I've mentioned, plus of course Swami Vivekananda, are rightly known and taught about throughout India. The protagonists of the Kerala Renaissance, who are no less significant, are not. For my part, I'm currently working on a short and I hope accessible biography of Sri Narayana Guru, but I firmly believe that the great Guru, who as an Ugava changed the course of the Renaissance by consecrating a stone as an Ugava Shiva and went on to helm the Renaissance in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, ought to be far better known outside Kerala. So it is with Saint Chavara. I really hope that we can spread the word of his remarkable life, and I fervently hope that a popular biographer will undertake to chronicle his extraordinary life and contribution to education. Because even at a policy level, the saint's vision transcended its age, his sagacity and foresight, enabling him to enact measures that we are still struggling nearly 80 years after independence to implement. In an India still grappling with inequality, exclusion, and the denial of basic rights to many, the life and legacy of Saint Kuriakose Elias Chavara, a spiritual and religious leader, social and educational reformer, and prodigious writer of both theological texts and poetry, shine with timeless relevance. His unwavering commitment to education as the most powerful catalyst for social transformation must serve as a rallying cry for all. It was not merely literacy he sought to spread, but the light of knowledge that liberates, empowers, and uplifts entire communities. He envisioned an egalitarian society where no one was held back by the shackles of religion, caste, gender, or poverty, an ideal we are yet to realize fully. Let us then take inspiration from the saint's extraordinary example and redouble our efforts to wield education as a tool to break down the barriers that still divide us. As the loving father tells us in his autobiographical chronicles, Hindus, Muslims, and Christians together toiled day in and day out to construct his monastery in Malana. Seeing them hard at work together as children of one God, Saint Chavara realized that the divine's glory and grandeur rely on the greatness of all human beings. Today, when efforts are being made to tear us asunder on the grounds of religion, let us honor the legacy of the saint by reuniting with renewed zeal in building another structure. This time of peaceful pluralism, structure of a progressive India that our founding fathers and mothers had envisaged. The torch that the saint lit more than a century and a half ago still burns bright, and it is now our turn to carry it forward with fresh vigor, all while ensuring that his dream of universal empowerment through education no longer an aspiration, but a reality for every child in India. Thank you all very much for listening to me so patiently, and Jai Hind.
On behalf of everyone present here, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Tharoor once again for sharing his wisdom.
Following the enlightening lecture by esteemed Dr. Shashi Tharoor, we are delighted to open the floor for an interactive session, a rare and invaluable opportunity to engage directly with one of the most eloquent and thought-provoking minds of our time. Participants are encouraged to ask questions that not only reflect curiosity, but also align with the spirit of meaningful dialogue. I would like to invite Sri George Kallivailil to moderate the interactive session. It's a humble request to refrain from sharing your point of view. However, we welcome and encourage short and crisp questions. Kindly avoid repetition and allow the moderator to guide the session. Let's maintain decorum and make this an enriching experience for all.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive and exhaustive. Since I work in the field of education, the National Education Policy of 2020 is considered to be a very landmark document. And do you find contributions of Saint Chavara in that document? Is it going to be a unifying factor? Because there is so much of, talk about polarization. Education should be a unifying factor for such a diverse and large country as ours.
Indeed. But I think Saint Chavara's legacy was already imprinted in our education policy before this more recent national policy. The more recent policy has certainly done some very innovative and interesting things, but it has done so on top of a basic acknowledgement of Saint Chavara's message, which goes back decades before that. So I'm not trying to be political and say I'm not giving credit to the government, all credit to all governments, but I think that, as I mentioned in my speech, his basic lesson had been learned much earlier by many state governments, in fact going back even before independence to Travancore in 1936 and so on. But also I would say that some of the valuable lessons of the practical, how important it is to educate the so-called untouchables, the excluded, the marginalized, the oppressed, how important it is to ensure that if they can't afford to come to school because they have to earn their bread, that you will give them something to eat so they can afford to stay in school. That you will, in Chavara's case, he went beyond midday meals. He gave them books. He gave them clothes to wear because many of them were too poor to be properly shod or dressed. So he had a holistic approach to education, which we are not yet fully able to manage. Our government schools cannot give you anything more than the midday meal. They don't give you free clothing, for example. But Chavara, I would say that he was a paragon, and we are still in the process of emulating what he taught us.
Thank you for the wonderful question and answer. Anybody, please raise your hands. Introduce yourself.
Good evening, sir. Myself, Sri Varun Jayas. I'm an first year economics student from Hansraj College, University of Delhi.
Oh, hi.
I know you are a very famous alumni of St. Stephen's, a nearby college of ours. And what I wanted to mainly is, as an economic student, we always study by the theory of the drain of wealth by Dadabhai Nauroji. We all know about that. So what I want to ask you is, with the increasing number of students moving abroad for higher education and career opportunities, India faces a modern day brain drain.
No doubt I would come back. But the problem we have is many who go abroad to study stay abroad, and that's partially because of what they see as a paucity of equally attractive job opportunities in India. And that is a real challenge for the government and for policy makers, that we have to create an environment that generates more jobs. Right now we have the highest unemployment rate for college graduates in the world. So how can you blame a college graduate for going? I'm not in favor of a compulsion, as you seem to imply, that you must have a policy that makes them come back. No, I don't think I can do that. I would very much be in favor of letting individuals choose, but let us make our country more attractive for them by creating a plethora of opportunities. There was a brief spasm in the first decade of the 21st century when there were more students coming back than staying on. It didn't last very long. It lasted more or less till the global financial crisis of 2008-9, then slowed everybody's economies down, including ours. But for about a decade, the picture changed. I can tell you from my batch, though I'm not an IIT person, as you rightly said, I'm from St. Stephen's in Delhi. I know that my contemporaries in the IITs, the entire batch used to get scholarships to go abroad, usually to America. The entire batch. And more than 90% never came back. The entire Silicon Valley is populated with people of that generation who went out, the cream of the crop from our schools. Now, when these people from the same sorts of backgrounds started coming back, I was excited. And I remember making speeches when I was minister about this phenomenon. Sadly, it didn't last very long, and now we're again facing the same old, bad old problem that people are going out because they feel there are better opportunities abroad, and people are not coming back because they feel there's a paucity of jobs here. We have to fix that, and the best way to fix it is by opening up our economy, streamlining regulation, eliminating red tape, trying to create a genuine ease of doing business, not just in slogans, but in actual policy. Kerala is a good example where I'd like to see that happen. And then trying to take this forward in such a way that we can actually start delivering opportunities for people that will make them come back on their own without any compulsion. Let's hope that happens. But that's the long-term objective. Your problem you've identified is right.
Thank you. Now next, senior journalist AJ Philip.
I have one doubt. You see, you mentioned about Chavara, Saint Chavara starting a Sanskrit school in Manganam. I was also puzzled by the fact that he started a Sanskrit school. How
started a
Sanskrit medium school. Sanskritam.
Sanskrit school, yeah. 1846.
Yeah. I was wondering, why he did that. The reason I found out, I did a little research, and I found that the Catholic Church at that time had a little problem with the language English, because it was not in favor of English language, it was promoting its own Latin language. That is why Father Chavara thought that it was not right to start an English medium school. Rather, he started a Sanskrit medium school.
Right. That's a very, very good point. And I must say that that also reflected two other things. Number one, his tremendous faith in the roots of Indian culture and Sanskrit language, which is what's again embodied by the beautiful song sung by Denny Matthew, which is a Christian lyric to Saint Chavara written in Sanskrit. And that's typical. This is the legacy he wanted us to have. And at the same time, the second factor I would say is he wanted to do that as an act of subversion against the exclusion of the outcasts from this kind of education. Remember, Sanskrit was a preserve of a very, very tiny percentage of society. In Kerala, Brahmins were not even 1% of the population. Yet they were the only ones who were entitled to read and to study Sanskrit. So he said, why should that be? If all human beings are equal, as he believed fervently, then why can't they all have access to the same material? And so he broke the spell by letting anyone, including there were Dalit students in that first class that started Sanskrit. And what was remarkable about that is that no one had the courage to do that before. I mean, if today there are priests in Kerala and Tamil Nadu who can perform all the rituals and devotions and know all the mantras in Sanskrit, it's a direct, or if you like, a long-term result of that policy that was started 180 years ago. That's the remarkable thing.
Thank you. Hearty welcome to my dear friend Anto Anthony MP. Now, anybody, please raise the hand. That side.
I'm coordinator of South Indian Outreach Mission. Sir, accept, respect and celebrate diversity. In the present political scenario, very important and very significant. I found it extremely appealing. Would you like to comment on it more?
Absolutely. In fact, that is one of the key sort of sustainable messages of Saint Chavara that hold a vital lesson for the India of today. As I mentioned, when St. Joseph's Monastery was built, the people helping him build it were Hindus and Muslims as well as Christians. It was not just the exclusive domain of one set of people. And he said, they're all the children of God, and they're building a house of God for me. It was a wonderful way of looking at the fact that everyone, and it comes from the root. I mean, we are diverse in terms of these external features, our religion, our caste, our language, our appearance, our gender, but we're all the same in the eyes of God. That was his fundamental conviction. And in that sense, diversity was entirely acceptable. It's actually, as the sort of Hindu that I am, I share very much that same conviction, that if we all share the same Atman, which is going to be eventually merged into that cosmic Brahman, then how can we draw artificial distinctions between ourselves? You and I share the same soul spirit, that's the Atman. And similarly, Chavara said, the God has made us all in his image. And therefore for him, this diversity was almost axiomatic, because the diversity was more superficial, if you like, than the essence of our oneness in the eyes of God. And I think that's where his theological understanding, his spiritual convictions, and his practical social reform side all fused into one, because they all were a seamless understanding of humanity.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor. Now our Jewish friend.
Shalom, brother. My name is Rabbi Ezekiel Isaac Malekar.
Hello, Rabbi Ezekiel. Nice to meet you.
I remember your words when Bangladesh was liberated in 1971, and you referred to General Jacob and General Arora and Field Marshal.
I knew the late J.F.R. Jacob.
My question is, Saint Chavara said that children are the divine gift of God, and it is a moral responsibility of the parents to see that all the children are provided with the holistic education for the complete development of the personality.
That's right.
Intellectual, spiritual, physical. So how will you enlighten us the role of the parents, how effectively they could play this role in today's world?
Rabbi, you're very right, and yet I would say that the parents are only one part of the duty. I think St. Chavara recognized that he himself started schools. I mean, he was not a parent himself. He was father to all the children, but he was not the father, literally. But the obligation of the parents was then to facilitate their children's education by letting them go to the Pallikudams. So if you look at it that way, what he was saying was, look, yes, you are, God has given these children to you in trust. You have to nurture them, educate them, bring them up. And we are there to give you the school environment and the facilities so that these children can benefit from it. So it is yes, a parental responsibility to send the children But it is also a shared responsibility of leaders of society, and in this case of the church, to educate the child.
Any ladies?
Good evening. I have a very small question. Does the reservation policy have any relevance to furthering the vision of Saint Chavara? If yes, then to what extent has it been successful?
You know, it's a very, very good question. And by the way, I think as a Jain yourself, I understand, you would really appreciate his reverence for nature, which the Jain faith strongly shares, because he also saw nature as God's creation. And so since nature is ours also, in a sense, in trust from God, we have to respect it and live in harmony with it. And that's something the Jain faith very strongly believes. But, you know, I don't think we've got, in one sense, what he has done, he has given us a number of tools that have proven sustainable. And therefore he has constructed an approach to education, which we have followed now for 180 years, since 175 years since his time. And I would say that those elements continue to be valid now and in future. Where we have not succeeded, and it's not his fault, it's ours, is in living up to his ideals. That is, that he would have wanted a society where everyone was equally educated. We're not yet there. We're much better off now than we were for a long time. But it's taken us, he passed away in 1871, literally 153 years later. Can we still speak of 100% literacy in India? Not in every state. So we're still a long way to go. That's one thing. Secondly, he wanted us to completely break through the artificial barriers that men have made. I mean, caste, for example, religious divides, lack of interreligious harmony, and so on. And we have not done that. In fact, if anything, there's been a regression in recent years. I would say the India that I grew up in was far more willing to abandon caste and abandon and promote religious harmony. National integration was a slogan in those days in my childhood. But we have sadly regressed from then to an India in which, as you know, we are seeing more and more violence and disaffection between communities on the basis of their identity. And Chavara would have told them, what are your identities? You're a child of God. Mahatma Gandhi said the same thing to the Harijans. What is Harijan? Child of God. That's precisely what he wanted people to think of. But we're not there yet. And sadly, if anything, these distinctions that human beings have made amongst themselves have sharpened. And that's why I think his message is so much more relevant today than perhaps it needed to have been in, say, 40, 50, 60 years ago, when everyone was saying the same thing that he was teaching us. Today, too many people are saying the opposite. We need to fight for his ideals.
But that was a great answer to a very good question. Next.
Yes, good question.
Hi.
George?
Just introduce yourself.
Yes, good evening. My name is Benjamin Somi. I'm first year student pursuing political science honors from Ramjas College.
Wow, okay.
And my question is in respect to social reforms. It shouldn't be surprising that when one individual initiating reforms, that one should not be surprised from expecting backlashes, criticisms, and counter movements, and even serious false allegations. So, in your opinion, in today's generation, what values, ideals, and principles that today's budding future reformers of this youth and generation should inculcate in order to transform this society properly and effectively? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the backlash phenomenon was not one that affected him too badly. In fact, within the church, there was widespread acceptance. And as I said, the bishop even issued an order, which was binding on all churches, to follow his rule and have political quotums.
Yes,
whereas, I'm sorry to say that 20 years after his death, when Mahatma Iyengar tried to get Dalits into school, the school was burned down. So there was a backlash from Hindu society, upper caste Hindu society, in parts of Travancore when he was trying to do that. So the backlash was not Chavara's problem, but it was a problem for other reformers in other parts of India, and particularly continues to be a problem. There are still stories of Dalit atrocities and so on and so forth. So what can we do, you ask? The obvious thing is we have to instill greater awareness and consciousness of these values. I mean, he did it through religion, by saying we are all God's children.
Yes,
Mahatma Gandhi also tried to use that kind of invocation, we are all God's children. Today, maybe we need to also do more practical things, including pointing out in the wake of the Constitution Day celebrations, we are all equal citizens of India. We all have the same rights. and that no one has the right to impede somebody else's opportunity for self-advancement, education, self-empowerment because of identity, because of religion, because of caste. Now, I would argue that you know, by and large, we are there in the sense that I would say it's very, very few people in India who would openly say that they don't agree with that, would openly say, no, Dalits don't deserve to be in school, or openly say that girls don't deserve to study, or whatever. But there are still such pockets of resistance. And we need to overcome that, first of all, by absolute social awareness, public consciousness raising, spreading the message, and so on. For example, Kerala's Universal Literacy Campaign was an amazing march undertaken by people through every remote village to teach people how to read and write. That kind of grassroots activism is also necessary, and it's not been practiced enough in all the villages of our country, in the north in particular. But in addition to that, also we need legislation backing it. And we do have the laws now. We just have to make sure we implement them.
We are going to conclude, but I can ask anybody.
I think we have a last question or two, and then we.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I
Sure.
have one more commitment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
for this. I'm from Zoroastrian faith, and my name is Marazwan Nariman Zaiwala, and practicing Bedin Paswan as a half priest, you can say. And my suggestion, or maybe my views to you all, that we are talking of one nation, one religion, one mankind. That is a humanity, and in Zoroastrian faith also Hamazor, unity we call it. But what I found, that university which India could not make it up for PhD degrees and all, the person has to go abroad and get his values there. So we should think on that values of universities. We can make it as a one university for all religions purpose, or maybe for the PhD degrees, which we can say charity begins at home and ends at home. That is my suggestion.
Well said, sir. I think we need to emphasize the common in all language, all religions. And there are very many common elements, as I mentioned throughout my speech. I found a lot of Hindu ethics and values in what Saint Chavara taught as a Christian. I'm sure that you, as a Zoroastrian, I'm sure you as a Jain, you as a Jewish person, will similarly find elements that are in common with your faith. The notion of God's love is present in every religion. And the need to treat other human beings, our fellow human beings, with compassion and love and dignity, respecting their inherent dignity, that is also present in every faith. I would agree with you, sir. We need to try and do much more, Mazbanji, to make this happen. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, sir.
Can we make that the last question, George, or are the other hands up?
Yeah, here on the right side.
All right, two more then.
Hi,
All right.
sir. I just wanted to briefly ask.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Anne. I would like to keep this very brief. I wanted to ask that how can education guarantee social transformation when we see that there are people who are well educated but still carry prejudices and biases?
Very sadly true, and therefore the word guarantee doesn't apply, dear. Education doesn't guarantee anything. It doesn't even guarantee that the person has understood what the degree after his name says he has. So I think we have to accept that human beings are still carry with them the fatal flaws, or the Christians would say the original sin is still tainting so many human beings. All I can say is that education is part of a palette of approaches. Education, public consciousness awareness raising, spirituality, legislation, and effective government policy. All of these have to go together if we're going to get the results we want. I would say that when I was growing up, I learned a lot in the classroom, but I was also constantly being bombarded with positive messages in society. When the government was constantly giving you slogans of unity in diversity, national integration, social harmony, intercommunal relations, those were all part. I mean, you're hearing it every day from one forum or the other, one movie or the other, one documentary on films division or the other, whatever it may be. It was a constant refrain. We were all brought up to believe that this is something we had to take for granted, as basic as loving your mother or respecting your teacher or whatever, was all these things. Today, sadly, that's completely absent. And on the contrary, we are hearing declaimed and expressed from public platforms messages of divisiveness, hatred, bigotry, prejudice. And as you say, people who are educated, people who are in positions of power and influence are using that kind of language. What can I say to you? So education doesn't guarantee anything, but we have to try and build the kind of society where the people who don't want these values in common will be themselves pushed to the sidelines and the margins rather than be at the center and the top of our society.
Thank you. It was a wonderful answer.
Sister, is it? Yes, sister. One last one. Sister, which sister?
Yeah. You can introduce yourself.
Okay, I am Sister Elizabeth William.
Okay. Wonderful. Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay.
Go ahead, sister.
We learn the definition for education as to bring out the best in the human being. But every day's life brings a different idea, different thing in action. What we see when we read the newspaper in the morning, the child is killed by mother, husband is killed by brother, son, like that. Very sorrowful news. And one side we say we are educated. Percentage of literacy is very high. And these two factors don't coincide. No, don't operate equally. What can we do? Especially we are all followers of Saint Chavara. We belong to CMC congregation and we are giving much stress on education. And how can we change the attitude of people? Why people are doing like that even though they say they are educated?
Thank you, sister. That's been a common theme of many of the questions that I've tried to answer, including most recently from this young student. I just think that education doesn't guarantee that people will be changed, but we still have to educate them. We have to instill the right values in them. I remember when this tragic Nirbhaya incident happened in Delhi, saying to the then Chief Minister, the late Sheila Dikshit, that we need to bring about education of boys from the very smallest classrooms and classes in school. From the age of 5 or so, they should learn the importance of respecting women, so they don't grow up to do such horrific things. And they understand to respect the people of the other gender, who happen to be a different gender, but are in every other way as entitled as they are to all the benefits of society. Now, how do we educate people? That a teacher like you, I'm told by Father Roby, you've been teaching for 25 years, you know best how to educate people effectively. Would you say as a teacher that everyone you've educated has imbibed your lessons? Almost certainly not. There will be some students who have, maybe a majority will have, but there'll always be some who either don't pay attention or are resistant or just don't grasp the importance of what you're saying. That is human nature, sister. And as the young lady was asking earlier, we are seeing this across our country. There will be some who either are immune to learning or resistant to learning, and who therefore behave in ways that are reprehensible. But we have to keep fighting, we have to keep struggling on. I mean, after all, when Saint Chavara lit the lamp's light still shines. We just have to take the light into more corners of darkness that do exist still in our society. Thank you all very much. I'm sorry, I must go now.
And the last one more question.
All right.
Hi, sorry.
Hi, sure.
So thank you for a very
Thank you, ma'am. Could you hold the mic a little higher so I can hear you?
Hi, can you hear me now? Thank you for a very thought-provoking address.
Thank you.
I'm one of those people who stayed in the US for 17 years and then came back.
Okay.
You know, we decided to come back. And so you talked about ease of doing business and job opportunities. I see a lot of positive changes. You know, I had this 17-year lacunae and then I come back. So I see, you know, I have that perspective. But one of the things that strikes me every day is ease of living. And, you know, and I just wanted to bring the discussion back and get your perspective as an MP and somebody who's been in the public space and has the opportunity or, you know, the platform to make a change. I see a very big lacuna when it comes to daily law and order and ease of living. Rose ki marpeet. And I just wanted your perspective on what are we doing not right, or what are we missing in the public policy space, or even from a citizen perspective, what can we do?
We're not doing enough is the short answer. I mean, frankly, I went to a missionary school or two, and therefore instruction in values was very much part of it. Whether it was called moral science in one school or values of life in another school, it was essentially these ethical principles that are so important to us. I don't know, frankly, how well that's being taught anymore and how deeply it's instilled, and whether it's taught at all in a meaningful way outside the missionary schools. In the government schools, in the private schools of other denominations or no denomination, what are the civic lessons we're imparting to our people? Why is it, for example, that the same Indian who, when he goes abroad, will look for a garbage bin to throw his litter in, will just throw it on the street here? The same Indian who wouldn't be caught dead spitting his pan out on a sidewalk in America will spit here. Why is it we have so little civic consciousness? Where have we failed to instill it in people? And the same Indians will bathe 4 times a day at home, or twice a day at home, and live in a spotless home, will not care about the public spaces around them. It's not their problem. This is something, this lack of, as you called it, law and order, you can call it civic responsibility, whatever it may be, this is a besetting failing. And I think just as the Prime Minister conducted a campaign for Swachh Bharat in terms of cleanliness, which was very much overdue and which is still an unrealized dream, we should also now be promoting a greater sense of civic responsibility and a sense of commitment to each other in society. If we are only focused on our own well-being and those of our immediate family and relatives, and we don't care about the rest of society, I'm sorry to say we will never prosper the way in which other countries that share a civic sense have prospered. I'm being very blunt, but since you asked the question frankly, I give you a frank answer. Thank you all very much.
That was a wonderful Q&A section.